Welcome to the video lecture series for entrepreneurship. In this multi-part series, we're going to go over the idea of developing your business story. And this video is going to go through the first part of your business story, the basics. And so when we look at the basics, this part will be used in your mini plan, your mini business plan that you'll be developing. And the first thing is developing the name of your business. So when we look at what makes a good name, first and foremost, the name has to be memorable in some fashion to your customer. Hopefully it ties into what you're doing. But also there are some legal specifics that you need to look at when identifying the name of your business. Number one is someone else currently using that name. Now, the question that comes into play is someone using that name? And if you use that same name, would it potentially cause a confusion with the customers of identifying which way to go? And so if I opened a restaurant called McDonald's, obviously, no matter where I wanted to put that location, my name, McDonald's, even if I spelled it differently, could create confusion with the internationally known company McDonald's. Now, let's say there's a restaurant in California called Joe's, and I want an open place called Joe's. Now, by opening a place called Joe's in Wisconsin, I'm not going to confuse customers of Joe's in California. Next thing also, obviously, is logo and trademark infringement, that you'll have to do checks to identify that your trademark and your logo doesn't infringe what someone else is doing. Then the other piece that you look at now is, can I create a business name? Is there a website address available with that name? And if so, how am I going to put my name on a website? Do I have to spell it out? Is there an abbreviation I can use? What is available? The other thing that we need to identify is who makes up the company's leadership team. First, we'll identify the owner or owners of the company. Next, we're going to identify key staff positions that they will have, and why do we feel that those people are qualified to hold those positions. One mistake business owners do is they bring in their personal friends and family into a business. What we need to identify is, are those people that we're bringing into this business, are they actually qualified to hold those positions? And so, especially if you're going to bake for financing, they want to identify the people you are surrounding yourself with and how are they going to help for the success of this business. In this section, you are also going to list specific vendors. So you may list who your accountant's going to be, maybe who your attorney is going to be. And so it should be an overall resource list for you. Next thing you're going to do in the basics section here is you're going to talk about the organizational structure. Now, you can pick one of 5. There's more different organizational structures than that, but we're going to talk about 5 different organizational structures that you could potentially pick from. Sole proprietorship, partnership, your classic C-type corporation, an S-type corporation, and a limited liability company. Those are the structures we're going to look at. First, when we look at a sole proprietorship is going to be owned and operated by one single person. All profits of the organization are considered income of the owner, and the owner assumes all of the liability of the business. When the owner dies, so does the business. And so that's something to be aware of. Next, under partnership, similar to sole proprietorship, but now you're running it by 2 or more people. All profits are going to be divided between the partners, and all liabilities are going to be shared between the partners. Partnerships in general have a high rate of failure, and if you're trying to exit the partnership, the remaining partner would have to buy that partner's portion of the business out. Corporation. Corporation is a separate entity from the owners themselves, which is in a lot of circles seen as an advantage. The corporation is responsible for all debts. It is chartered by the state in which it is formed. Organizational structure is comprised of 3 different components: the stockholders, the board of directors, and the officers. And when you apply for your incorporation, you need to draft a document called the Articles of Incorporation. When we look at those 3 components of the organizational structure of a corporation, first you have the stockholders. Those are the owners of the corporation. Now you might do it simple and say, I am a stockholder of the organization. I own 100% of the shares of stock. You also have a board of directors who are elected by the shareholders to oversee the corporation, and their tasks include setting up the corporate goals, hiring officers, and managing the operations. The officers are responsible for achieving those specific goals. Titles that officers can commonly hold is CEO or Chief Executive Officer, Vice President, Treasurer, Secretary, maybe Chief Financial Officer. Those are just a couple of the titles. You're not really locked into specific titles. We talk about the Articles of Incorporation. Items that need to go into your Articles of Incorporation. Obviously, the name and the address of the corporation. What is the company's purpose and the type of business that the corporation is going to be in? What's the types of stock and number of shares of each type that are initially going to be offered? What is the life of the corporation? Most of the times in your Articles of Incorporation, you're going to say it's perpetual. That is the advantage of incorporating, is that with your sole proprietorship and partnership, generally if one of those main people, and in a sole proprietorship, the one person dies, that ends the life of that business. By incorporating, now you can have a strategy to keep the business going. What is the initial capital investment going to be made by the stockholders? What and how are the methods of transferring shares of the stock? And list the initial board of directors. When we look at corporations, we're going to look at different advantages and disadvantages. In the advantages section, stockholders are not liable for corporate debts. And so with the partnership and sole proprietorship, we're saying the owners are going to be responsible for those debts. They've got to pay that out of their pocket. Corporation, when you incorporate, that's not going to be true. Corporation's got perpetual lifetime. You have the ability to raise funds, ability to transfer ownership, and it is set up with a more complex management structure, which can be seen as an advantage, helping you run a better organization. Some of the disadvantages you run in corporations: there's cost to incorporate. It's much more difficult to form. Sole proprietorship, you pretty much put your name on the door, get a Wisconsin seller's permit, you have started, you're good to go. You're going to have increased regulations of how you report your profits and your losses being a corporation. And you're taxed twice. And so your corporation is taxed, and then once the shareholders receive their profit, those are taxed. And so any money coming into the corporation is taxed, and then that leftover amount, the profit to the shareholders, that is also taxed. And so one method that the government came up with was creating what they call an S corporation. And it's set up like a corporation in regards to structure, but it is going to be taxed more like a sole proprietorship. Shareholders have liability. Profit is considered stockholders' personal income. And so you kind of take that protection piece, but it also kind of goes back onto telling the shareholders that they have the liability of paying the debts versus a C corporation where you didn't have that same liability. So then, to help infuse people to start businesses, a lot of people are saying, well, sole proprietorship, there's a lot of personal liability. We live in a very litigious society, and so businesses are being sued. People aren't getting into business. And so they said, corporations, that's a lot of paperwork. There's the double taxation piece. The S corporation really doesn't protect you from liability. So they created what they called the LLC, or the limited liability company. It is not a corporation. This type of business is created in a lot of ways for tax purposes. It has the liability advantage of a corporation. It is its own separate legal entity, but they do not issue stocks. The articles of organization is needed instead of articles of incorporation, a much simpler document, and it's easier to set up than a corporation. And so a lot of people are going to this limited liability piece. I would highly recommend, regardless of the type of business that you're going to be starting, that you don't go very long until you go into this limited liability company component of it, just because it gives the business owner some added protections.